This podcast is intended for a mature audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Legend of the Bones. Following in the footsteps of giants, Legend of the Bones is a chimera. A mix of old-school tabletop RPG and dark fantasy storytelling. As its name might suggest, in Legend of the Bones the dice rule. There'll be no rerolls, no fudging the dice, no metacurrency. The roll of the bones will determine the character's destiny, and no one will be spared their fate. None shall escape the destiny of bone. Last time on Legend of the Bones. Following their battle with the Ulfhethnar, the companions remained in Lostwithiel for a few days whilst they recovered, and thereafter continued their journey upriver to the town of Varfell, at the frontier of Lord Petrock's lands, from where they would travel into the Dragonspine Mountains to Penmelkine in search of the mage Demelza. Fortunately, the remainder of the journey was uneventful, but on reaching Varfell, it was immediately apparent that the inhabitants were preparing for conflict, with major construction taking place to improve the town's defences. The companions were greeted by the local thane, Lord Tuok, whose initial disposition was wary. But after Canute having identified himself, Tuok, having heard of the Northman's reputation, offered a genuine welcome and invited the companions to his hall. Here, Tuok relayed how Lord Polmir's steward, Maelor, had been sent a month prior to tempt the thane into breaking oath with Lord Petrock and give his allegiance to the rebel Polmir. Tuok had refused, but in doing so had been punished by increased brigand raids on his lands, and by having his messengers to his liege intercepted and executed. Unable to risk his barges travelling the river for fear of attack, the town's economy, dependent on shipping its mining output, had been damaged. Tuok saw the companions as a means to get word back to Lord Petrock, but Beric quickly refused, given the importance of their task. However, it was then that Canute revealed that his intention was to not accompany the others to Penmelkine. The Skarne warlord argued that the loyalist forces would be too few in the war to come, and that allies would be needed to secure victory. And therefore, he would take the Uvadraka back to the open seas and seek aid from Beric's true father, Jarl Einar. Chapter 55, Part 1, Day 58, Morning. Party status: Beric, 43 out of 43 hit points. Lena, 31 out of 31 hit points. Valen, 19 out of 19 hit points. Talion, 27 out of 27 hit points. Canute, 36 out of 36 hit points. Spells available: Valen has memorised Push, Shield, Soothe, Revive, Clairvoyance, and Ignite. Talion has memorised Resolve, Poetic Prose, Pitch, Imbue, and Lullaby. Lena can pray for 2 first-level miracles, 2 second-level miracles, 1 third-level miracle, and 1 fourth-level miracle. The sun shone brilliantly over Varfell, in a sky clear but for a few passing cumulus clouds, as the companions gathered on the town's wharves, the wooden planks creaking under their feet. The blood-red woven banners that were raised above the town's palisade flapped vigorously in the breeze, their colour a sharp contrast against the blue sky. They flew as a proud proclamation of Tuok's lordship, serving as a reminder of the settlement's importance. The crew of the Uvadraka were hard at work, loading barrels and sacks onto the ship, having spent the previous day procuring supplies and organising repairs. Canute had explained that his journey would take him to the city of Porthcullen, a place where he hoped to pick up rumours of Skarne movements, and from there, with fortune on his side, he might be able to find Einar. Before that, the Northman had agreed to deliver a message from Tuok to Lord Petrock. The Elderman's stronghold of Pen Glanau was only a short detour from Porthcullen, and whilst Tuok would beseech his liege for reinforcements, he had accepted, from the intelligence presented by the companions, that any attacks on his lands were almost certainly a diversion away from the enemy's true intent. In exchange for Canute's service, Tuok had agreed to provide the remaining companions with a guide for their journey into the mountains, though they had yet to meet them. For now, though, the companions' hearts were heavy with the prospect of farewell.
Well, friends,
Canute began sanguinely, trying to mask his emotion, though his eyes were glassy.
For now, at least, we must tread different paths.
He gestured with his head to Beric, before smiling at Lena, Valen and Talion.
Keep this big lump out of trouble, won't you?
Beric's expression betrayed his sadness, and he was struggling to hold back a lump that was forming in his throat. Lena, eager to shift the mood, stepped forward with an air of determination, her voice steady. "Here," she announced, holding aloft the delicate gold disc brooch given to her by the giant, Humber. "I have given this brooch the blessing of Havlar, that he may protect you on your voyage." The cleric spoke with reverence, her voice invoking the god of the wind and sea. "You once said that my gods are not yours, but I hope you can accept it, along with my prayers." Without asking permission, she reached up, pinning it to Canute's cloak, her fingers brushing lightly against the fabric. The Northman towered above her in silence. As Lena finished, Canute placed his hand over hers, looking her squarely in the eyes, his gratitude plain to see.
"Aye,"
he said softly and with sincerity.
"That I can."
Canute smiled, a fleeting but genuine gesture, for though he and the cleric had had their differences, the Northman still held her with the deepest respect. Lena smiled back, her own heart touched by the moment. "May the Nine watch over you, Canute Haraldsson." He nodded, then turned to Beric.
"It is time for us to part, cousin."
Beric nodded, but said nothing. After a brief moment of hesitation, Canute removed one of his golden arm rings and held it out to the big warrior.
"Take this."
He offered the ring with a quiet but resolute tone.
"As a symbol of my oath and bond to you."
He paused, the weight of his emotion passing between them.
"We have fought and bled together, stood in the shield wall, side by side, and we will do so again."
The Northman locked gaze with Beric.
"We are not just cousins, we are brothers."
With that, Canute opened his arms, and the two men embraced. "Stay alive," Beric spoke into his cousin's ear, his voice thick and barely more than a whisper.
"You too, brother."
They broke their embrace, gripping each other's shoulders firmly, unwilling to let go.
"And if not, then we shall meet again, in Valhall."
With that, Canute turned and boarded the Uvadraka, climbing swiftly to the steering platform. He gave the order for the sail to be raised and for the mooring ropes to be released. Slowly, the longship began to glide downstream, carried along by the current and a warm southerly breeze that billowed out its great sail. As the vessel passed through the watergate, Canute looked back and raised his hand in a final farewell.
"May the ancestors guide you."
He called out, his voice carrying over the water. The companions stood in quiet reverence as the Uvadraka slowly receded into the distance, its sail fully catching the wind, until it rounded a bend and disappeared out of view. So Canute has left the companions in search of Beric's father, Einar, in the hope of persuading him to fight for the loyalist forces of Power More. For several months I have been wrestling with the decision of whether Canute would go off in search of Jarl Einar, and if he did, how this might work in both game and narrative terms. I have to confess that I have been putting off the decision for some time, but I have now found myself in the position where I can no longer ignore it. Since episode 33, the spectre of war has been growing in the emerging story, as Reynard of Harburg has been slowly undermining the king's authority and sowing the seeds of rebellion in the south. I have established the Lords Conwyn and Petrock are the only ealdormen who remain steadfastly loyal to the king. The other lord on the north of the peninsula, Cullen, rules over the rich trading city of Porthcullen and puts his own self-interests ahead of loyalty. He would therefore likely blow with the prevailing wind, and so with only 2 of the ealdormen declared for the king, it is clear that the loyalist forces will be heavily outnumbered. Canute knows this, and he and Beric discussed the potential of seeking aid from Jarl Einar back in episode 45. At this time, the companions were committed to reaching Varfell in their journey to find Demelza, but given they have now arrived at the town, and the river can take them no further, it seems logical that this would be the time that Canute chooses a different path. However, rather than Canute simply disappearing from the story, I have decided that I am going to instead break the golden rule and split the party. I am going to have to feel my way with this to some degree, but my intent is as follows. I will occasionally, but not every episode, switch the narrative to catch up with Canute, but regardless, each day I will roll a wandering encounter for him and his crew, and should there be one, I will definitely flip to him to resolve it. Either way, just like with NPCs, all characters will continue to progress towards their next level regardless of whether they feature in an episode. Just because the spotlight isn't on them doesn't mean that they are not growing in experience. Now, all being well, with no distractions, it will take the Uverdracker 4 days to get back to the open sea. Being summer, it is prime time for the Skarne to be travelling the Whale Road in search of trade or plunder, and so after delivering Tuot's message, Canute will, as we have just heard, make for Porthcullen, which as a large trading port would be a good place to pick up rumours about where Jarl Einar may be found. That's all for another day though. For now, let's see whether the Northman experiences a wandering encounter on the first day. A roll of 1 on a d6 will indicate there will be. A 4. One final thing regarding Canute. The brooch given to him by Lena has been imbued with holy power through the 4th level homebrew miracle, Bless Object. When successfully prayed for, an object of the cleric's choosing is infused with one of 4 random powers, in this case, protection from enemies, also known as protection from evil. Now, as for the rest of the companions, they too have resupplied, but before they set off into the mountains, we need to introduce their guide. Since Kyr's death way back in episode 30, I've really missed not having a rogue in the party, but I just don't think it would be realistic for this guide to be of that class. I think the only logical class for a mountain guide is a ranger. I'm going to roll up a character off mic. Back in a minute. Okay, so what I have is a 3rd level ranger with the following stats. Strength 12, Intelligence 10, Wisdom 12, Dexterity 13, Constitution an impressive 16, and Charisma 9. A good set of scores. Now, as mentioned in a previous episode, I have made a custom version of the Ranger class, which unlike AD&D does not have access to magic. I won't go through the specific class abilities just now, but if you're interested, you can find details of the class at legendofthebones.blogspot.com. One last thing. In a bustling town, it makes sense that there is a possibility of some kind of notable random encounter. From now on, I'm going to say that for each day spent out and about in an urban environment, there is a 3 in 6 chance of such an encounter. Time to see if something happens. A 3. Okay, so I have created a random encounter table which you can find at legendofthebones.blogspot.com. Some of the entries just add colour and flavour, but others have the potential to result in real danger. Let's see what we get. Rolling 2d6. A 6. Interesting. But this encounter could be either positive or negative. I am going to ask the Mythic Event Meaning chart for a prompt to help me determine which it is. Action first. 07. Violate. Now that doesn't sound good. Now the subject. 23. Balance. Violate balance. Okay then, time to get back to the narrative. Chapter 55. Part 2. Day 58. Late morning. Party status. The party status is unchanged. The companions made their way slowly back through the bustling streets of Varthel towards Lord Tuok's hall. Traders and shopkeepers called out their wares from colourful stalls and open-fronted buildings, while children darted between the crowds, laughing and playing. The townsfolk went about their business, on the surface at least, seemingly unconcerned by the looming spectre of war. Passing through a square, the companions observed the construction of a new temple. The core of the structure was largely complete, save the uppermost parts of the walls and the roof, and it was plain that it was going to be an impressive building. A huge treadwell crane creaked as it hauled up heavy stone blocks. Labourers scurried about on stout wooden scaffolding, while masons carefully chiselled intricate carvings of patterns, saints, and so-called mythical beasts. One such craftsman was carving what appeared to be a manticore. "Strange," Beric commented, narrowing his eyes from the brightness of the sun as he observed the men at work. "How so, Beric?" Valen asked with curiosity. The warrior turned to the mage. "That Lord Tuok would expend men on such an endeavour, when the town's defences are in need of strengthening." Beric's response brought a smile to Lena's lips.
"It is not just that people's bodies must be protected in dark times, Beric. Their souls must be guarded as well."
She gestured towards a group of nearby onlookers, who stood in awe watching the temple's progress.
"And besides, a temple is a place of solace and hope."
The warrior nodded at Lena's wisdom. "Aye, sure enough we need some of that." A sudden, loud crack echoed around the square, interrupting Beric's words, and for an instant the warrior thought it was the sound of thunder, though it was impossible on such a fine summer's day. Chaos erupted, with frantic cries of panic from near the crane, as the axle securing the two great treadmills snapped violently. Workmen scrambled back in terror as the crane's two treadmills dislodged from the platform. The men who had been in control of the guide ropes let go to avoid being crushed, causing the jib to swing away from the temple towards the crowd. The crane's load, suspended 50 feet in the air, was knocked out of kilter. Several blocks of cut masonry were thrown from the pallet and were sent hurtling to the ground, where they smashed with tremendous force, sending dozens of jagged shards in every direction.
Get down!
Little did the companions know, but this is no accident. The random encounter I rolled was for a spy or agent, and it is they who have sabotaged the crane. Whoever they are working for, and what the motivation is, remains to be seen, but right now, there is immediate danger. Firstly, I'm going to make an unmodified attack roll against each of the companions, to see whether any of them are hit by shards of masonry. Any successful hit will deal 1d8 points of damage. First up, Beric. An 11 is a miss. Lena. A 9 is also a miss. Now Valen. A 2, lucky for the mage. And finally, Talion. A 12, the bard also avoids being hit. Okay, let's see what happens. Beric ducked instinctively as bits of masonry flew overhead. With the immediate danger past, he looked around and saw his friends were also unharmed. Getting to his feet, the big man surveyed the scene. The air was thick with dust that had risen from the crushed stones, and everywhere people were screaming in panic or crying in pain. Several people were lying motionless near the rubble. Others were staggering, covered in dust and blood. The workers who had flung themselves from the crane scrambled to their feet, eyes wide with shock and dismay. Their attention was on the scene of carnage that lay before them, and they did not notice that one of their number had climbed back onto the crane, a hatchet in his hand. Beric's eyes narrowed with suspicion. The man's face wore none of the shock of his fellows, and he seemed intent on some action. He moved to the spindle, where the rope that ran up to the jib was tethered. Lena must have seen the man also, for the blood drained from her face in horror.
No!
She exclaimed breathlessly.
Move!
Beric shouted at the folk who were still standing as he ran forward towards the crane. In their agitated state, those with enough of their wits about them began to run wildly from the perceived danger. But in their desperation to escape, several fell and were trampled underfoot. A young woman was barged in the chaos. She dropped the toddler that she was carrying and was swept away, crying out in terror for her child. Without a thought for her own safety, Lena sprang into action, rushing forward and pushing people aside. She scooped up the child, but now stood directly beneath the pallet, which swung precariously above her head. The man on the crane, hearing Beric's cry, looked up. For a moment he was startled at the sight of the big warrior charging towards him. The man sneered, then turning back, swung the hatchet down towards the rope. Pursuit. I am calling this segment Pursuit, but in truth, it may not get to that. The saboteur is trying to cause maximum chaos and terror by making the rest of the crane's load fall upon the already panicked onlookers. And as we have just heard, Lena and the child she is carrying are in grave danger should he succeed. The question is whether the companions can prevent that from happening. I will play this out round by round, and on that basis, I need to determine who has the initiative. It is critical that the party win this roll. Let's find out. Round 1. Initiative. The saboteur. A 2. The party. A 6. So far so good. Beric is 90 feet away from the treadmill, so running, he can make it there in one round. However, I will rule that climbing up upon the platform and getting to the man will take another round. The big warrior sprints across the square as fast as he can. Valen realises that Beric will not get there in time, and seeing Lena in peril, attempts to cast Push against the saboteur. This spell has a range of 120 feet, but the mage still must successfully pass his casting roll. A 12. Valen outstretches his hand and speaks the incantation. An invisible force springs from the mage's open palm, slamming into the saboteur and knocking him back 6 yards, enough to throw him clear from the platform. I will roll another d8. If the result is equal or less than 6, the man will collide with the wall of the temple. A 3. There is a crunch as the man slams into the wall for 4 points of damage. There is also a 3 in 6 chance that the saboteur will be knocked prone. A 1. The man grunts in pain at the impact, then falls to the floor. He will need to spend his action picking himself up. Meanwhile, Lena carries herself and the child to safety, while Talion shepherds the onlookers out of harm's way. Round 2. Initiative. The saboteur. A 3. The party. A 4. Beric runs around the crane and attempts to grapple the saboteur. With his bonuses and the man's armor class, the warrior will need to roll a 9 or more. A 19. Now to make an opposed strength test. As a reminder, the character that succeeds by the most or fails by the least wins. Beric is rolling against his strength of 17. A 15, that's just 2 degrees of success. The Saboteur is rolling against his strength of 12. At 11, just 1 degree of success. As the Saboteur gets to his feet, Beric grabs the man's arm, spinning him around and pushing him face first against the wall while pinning his arm behind his back. He puts his mouth close to the man's ear.
You're not going anywhere.
Thank you for listening to Legend of the Bones. I hope you've enjoyed the show. If you like what you've heard, then please consider rating and reviewing the show in your podcatcher of choice. Not only do I love seeing the feedback, but it really does help the show reach new listeners. As always, where would I be without my amazing cast of voice talent? Just one person to thank in this episode. Returning once again in the role of Canute is Jon Cohen, creator of Tale of the Manticore. Thanks, Jon. You always deliver, and I am ever grateful. I'll put Jon's links in the show notes. Now, the beginning of this month marked the 3-year anniversary of Legend of the Bones. I would like to take the opportunity to thank everyone who has contributed to and supported the show. Be that voicing a character, creating music, writing a review, or simply listening and giving it your valuable time. I am truly humbled by your support. You are the real legends. So thank you. On another note, it's amazing how the solo RPG podcast scene has really exploded over the past 2 years, and I am excited to announce that a bunch of us who put out shows have come together to create the Solo Roleplay Podcast Network. We have teamed up to bring you a curated collection of the best, highest quality, most dramatic and diciest solo roleplay podcasts in the world. So why not roll over to soloroleplayersnetwork.com and discover your new favourite solo role-playing podcast. Now all that's left for me to say is that if you would like to get in touch, you can contact me on X at LegendBones, Blue Sky at LegendBones, Mastodon at LegendBones, at ttrpg-hangout.social, Instagram at legendofthebones, email at legendofthebones@gmail.com, or go to legendofthebones.blogspot.com for show notes, house rules, character profiles, art, maps and more. Join me next time to find out what awaits our adventurers as the bones decide their fate. None shall escape the destiny of Bone.
Hi, I'm Jon from Tale of the Manticore.
Maddie Searle from A Game of One's Own.
PJ from A Wasteland Story and the Solo Roleplayers podcast.
Simon from Legend of the Bones.
Brian Rideout from Swords Against Madness.
Carl from The Lone Adventurer.
And I'm Sharik from Roll By Myself.
And with our solo role-playing audio,
Narrative,
Actual play.
Drama powers combined.
We are the Solo Roleplayers podcast network.
Usually accustomed to delving the depths,
Scouring the desert.
Surviving the wasteland.
or facing the dragon alone.
This time, we have teamed up to bring you a curated collection
of the best,
highest quality,
Most dramatic.
And diciest.
Solo roleplay podcasts in the world.
dozens of us.
So if you're looking for your next solo role-playing adventure,
roll over to soloroleplayersnetwork.com.
Sample and subscribe to something that takes your fancy.
And discover your new favourite solo role-playing podcast.
See you there.